Legion from Australia is right. What's happening in Australia right now could happen anywhere else in the planet, including the UK. So I was gonna do this as I was gonna do this wrapped into the What's Up tomorrow, but then I thought, hold on, Vic, there's a lot of stuff to cover, including politics, and everyone knows I love fucking politics. Whenever I get my teeth into politics, I usually generally start ranting. So I thought, better spin this off in a separate video because it deserves a video all by itself. No doubt, practically everyone out there who's watching me regularly have probably seen the videos that have been uploaded by Legion, who's behind me right now, and of course the vaping bogan. Australia has essentially banned vaping. They haven't banned vaping on paper, but they have enacted laws which will basically shut the vaping industry down. No more importation of e-liquids. They are now implementing laws that will come out on March the 1st, and they are talking about laws that will come out very soon that will essentially shut down e-liquid manufacturing in Australia. No more hardware importation, no more coil importation. In other words, if you're a vape shop in Australia, you're essentially fucked. The laws have already passed. They were written in and signed in under the door. Closed session, under the door, no public consultation, the door was slammed shut. Simple as that. So vape shops in Australia right now have only got the stock they essentially have left. Along with the wholesale and distros in Australia, they only have the stock they have left. Because after the stores run dry, that's it. No importation of e-liquids. The Australian government is already going to find a way to go after e-liquids made in Australia. No hardware importation, which covers tanks, drippers, pods, disposables, the entire fucking lot. That's the Australian vape industry shut down. And 3/4 of it was done behind closed doors. Let's rewind the clock a bit here, because there's a tale to tell with all of this, right? We'll rewind the clock to about 4.5 years ago. This is before the pandemic, long before 2020. We're talking about the back end of 2018, the tail end of what a lot of people call the golden age of vaping. It was round about this time that certain states over in the United States started to seriously clamp down on vaping, and everyone else across the planet, us here in the UK, including the folks in Australia, the folks in New Zealand, were looking at the United States thinking, what the fuck's going on over there? Fast forward a little bit more. We're talking halfway through the pandemic. We're looking at halfway through the lockdowns that were gripping the Western Hemisphere. Canada done a 180. Because before then, just as the states were individually knocking back vaping, there were a handful of companies that were considered the beacon of vaping. At the very top of that list was the UK, and we're basically still there at the top of that list. We are the beacon of vaping. And then you had New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. Yeah, Canada. Look at Canada now. But back then, Canada was considered one of the beacons of vaping. Because at the time when the United States, individual states like California, where Grim Green is, New Jersey, where Jay Hayes was implementing these bans, Canada was going down the same road as New Zealand. Now, this is where we turn our attention to New Zealand and Australia, because Canada was thinking of going down the direction that the United States were going down in 2018, but they decided, because they're a Commonwealth country, right, Commonwealth tied in with Britain, that they would listen to the Royal College of Physicians, based here in the UK. Vaping is 95 to 97% safer than smoking. Period. Full stop. Back then it wasn't a peer-reviewed paper. It was a white paper. Now it is peer-reviewed, however. It's been reviewed by other peers in the scientific and pharmacological world independently, and it's now a peer-reviewed paper. That happened last year, for the people that didn't know that. So Canada decided to go down the road of New Zealand. And what Jacinda Ardern's left-leaning government decided to do was enact laws, but laws that would regulate how the industry ran in New Zealand. They didn't want to go down the road of what the United States or individual states like California were doing in the United States. They wanted to go down the road of light touch regulation, essentially, to keep the industry intact, but to put regulations in place that would put it on par with smoking. In other words, if you're under a certain age, don't buy it. If you're a shop that's selling to underagers, you're going to get your hand slapped and a big fucking fine put on you. That kind of thing. Australia, at that time, 5 years ago, was also going down the exact same road. So you had 3 Commonwealth countries, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, following the United Kingdom and the Royal College of Physicians. Fast forward 2.5 years after that, in the middle of the pandemic, we're talking about 2020-ish, Canada does a 180. And what you're seeing in Canada now with the slow rolling bans that are going on is much the same as what individual states have done in the United States. But unlike the individual states like California, Canada decided to implement it a little bit at a time so the impact wouldn't be so great. So that's Canada knocked out the scene. Australia and New Zealand were still following. 2 years ago, as lockdown started to lift, the Australian government suddenly, unexpectedly, to some at least, started to do a 180. They started talking about regulation of electronic cigarettes. They started talking about the dangers of vaping. They completely and utterly ignored and dropped all references to the Royal College of Physicians and what the Royal College had said about vaping being 95 to 97% safer than smoking. That happened 2 years ago, and the Canada thing happened 2.5 years ago. So what caused Canada and not New Zealand, what caused Canada and Australia to start to go down that path? You just need to look at the United States, because that's where it all began. What has New Jersey, New York, California, and a large belt of Midwestern states that decided to all enact some kind of flavour ban got in common? What has 90% of those states got in common? And what has 90% of those states got in common with what happened in Canada 2.5 years ago and what happened in Australia 2 years ago that led up to the Australian ban right now? What have they all got in common? It's not money, trust me. Well, there's a little bit of money thrown in there, but it's not all about money. No, it's about politics. The left. Now, I'm not talking about old school socialists like myself. Yeah, I'm using that term for all you people in the United States that just went, oh, he's a fucking socialist. There's a difference between socialism and communism, people. For the people in the US that don't know this, Britain is inherently a left socialist leaning country. Free healthcare, free education, welfare state, free pension that you need to pay in taxes. That is the hallmarks of a socialist state. Not communist. There's a big fucking difference between socialism and communism. Big fucking difference. But what happened in the United States and California? Democratic ran, one state. The Republicans don't even have a foot in there. New Jersey, practically a one state. The Republicans have tried to get a foot in, but they keep getting knocked back. New York, one state city. The Republicans have tried, knocked back. Then you get the Central Belt of the Midwestern Democratic ran states, who are a two-tier state, right? So they have in one house Democrats and the other house Republicans, or in both houses Democrats, but the Republicans do have some kind of foot in. Anywhere the new left, now I'm not talking about old school socialists like myself, I'm talking about the new left. Anywhere the new left get their foot in, if they don't like it, if they don't agree with it, if they think it's bad, it's banned. Canada is the shining example. New Jersey is the shining example. New York is the shining example. Democratic, new left ran states. Now, we all thought, as we were watching this happen, as we were watching Grim Green go on and on about advocacy and nothing actually happening, but as we watched Grim Green go on about advocacy and fighting the good fight and all that, and we watched state after state after state after state fall, some of us come up with a pattern. It's the Democrats. Now, I'm not saying the Republicans on the centre right, I'm not saying the Republicans are fucking innocent in all this, because they had their hand in some royal fuck-ups in Republican-run states in the United States, increasing taxes to the extent it basically killed the vaping industry in that state. But if you look at the vast bulk of what happened in the US, it was the left that done it. If you look at what happened to Canada, what caused the Canadian government to shift from pro-vaping, following New Zealand, to anti-vaping, following the States? It was the knee-jerk reaction of the Justin Trudeau-led government with an influx of new left politicians. Again, the left. If you look at what happened to Australia, it was the influx of new left thinking. Again, the left. The only exception to the rule is New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern's government is a left-leaning government. But it's old left. It's old left. Like me. Old-fashioned socialists. Old-fashioned socialists. Now, in Legion's video, and I recommend you go and watch Legion's video, and I also recommend you go and watch Vaping Bogan's last video to do with all of this in Australia. At the end of Legion's video, he stated that no country is safe from what has happened in Australia. And he's completely and utterly correct. He's completely correct. Now you think about it. Parliamentary ran governments like Australia, like New Zealand, like the United Kingdom, and to a certain extent like Canada, are not like the government Senate and Congress system that the United States has. United States has a lot of lobbying going on, an awful lot of lobbying going on. There is billions and billions of US dollars changing hands between interest groups and political parties in the United States every single month. The same cannot be said for Australia, New Zealand, the UK and Canada. There is lobbying that goes on. There is hundreds of millions of Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, I think New Zealand has dollars as well, and British pounds changing hands between lobbyist groups and the British Parliament. But that lobbyist money is limited to a hard cap, at least here in the UK. The other thing that Canada, well, not so much Canada, but more so New Zealand, Australia and UK have got going for it, at least at the time, which kind of helped the Australian stance about 5 years ago, is healthcare is socially ran. More so in the United Kingdom. But what Legion said at the end of his video, that this could happen to any country, also means it could happen to the UK. And you know something? He is completely and utterly right. He is completely right. The United Kingdom has had the unique position of being the only country in the Western Hemisphere, the only country in the Western Hemisphere that has had a centre-right party at the seat of government in Westminster throughout the entire decade worth of the rise, golden age and plateauing of the electronic cigarette industry. We have not had a Labour government in power for almost 15 years. There is a difference between the centre-left, the new left, not the old socialist left. There's a difference between the centre-left and the centre-right. Centre-right under the Conservatives, the Tory party in other words, decided to take a hands-off approach until very recently to do with the electronic cigarette industry. This is why the UK is in the top 3 countries when it comes to sales in Shenzhen in China. This is why Shenzhen, all the big electronic cigarette companies, are now paying particular attention to the United Kingdom market. With the fall of the US market, a lot of attention shifted towards the European continent, including the UK and Russia. Russia is also a pretty big market as well, pretty big market. But what Legion says is right. Throughout all of this, throughout the Valley crisis, throughout United States healthcare saying vaping is bad, throughout the past 2 years of the Canadian healthcare system saying vaping is bad, throughout the past year and a half of Australian healthcare and Australian ministers saying vaping is bad, we've had a Conservative government in power. We've had a Conservative government in power that is funding a socialist National Health Service. We've had a Conservative government in power who said 7 years ago that they will take a hands-off approach on the electronic cigarette industry, and they will only step in if something goes horribly wrong, like the disposable thing that's going on right now. This is why the UK government, the Conservative government, is going to make some kind of statement at the end of this month to do with the disposable problem that's currently plaguing the UK market. But this is the only time in 10.5 years that the UK government stepped in directly. Think about that. Can any other country say that? No. No, they honestly can't. They honestly can't. But here's the problem. Right wing and left wing, whether it's old left or new left, right wing or left wing parties do not age well, especially in a parliamentary system, if they're in power for more than 10 years. Sleaze usually starts to step in. Scandals usually start to happen as things degrade from number 10 Downing Street outwards. You can see it with what's happening with the Tory party right now. What Legion said has me worried. It has me worried. This could happen. What happened in Australia, what's happening in Australia, could happen to any country. At the end of this year, sometime in October probably, Rishi Sunak is going to call for a general election. He doesn't have a choice. There's a fixed term parliament system now on the books. He's got to call it either at the end of this year or the very beginning, in other words, January, February of next year. It's highly doubtful he'll wait to January and February of 2025. He's more than likely to call it as an October election for 2024. Hands up everyone who thinks the Tories will win. Considering the amount of problems the Conservative Party currently have, considering they've went through about half a dozen fucking Prime Ministers in the space of 2 seconds, considering the scandals that have been going on, it looks as if, and all pollsters are suggesting this, it looks as if the Labour Party are going to win the next election. Now, whether the UK Labour Party under Keir Starmer gets an overall landslide majority of over 50, or whether Keir Starmer and Labour gets a minority government of under 20 seat majority, it doesn't matter. Labour are in power for the first time ever when it comes to the vaping industry. What Legion said about what's happening in Australia could happen in the UK is not an over-exaggeration, people. It's not. And here's why. The Shadow Health Secretary, who's the person on the opposition benches of the Labour Party, who shadows the current Health Minister of the UK government, the Shadow Health Secretary has already said publicly he wants to heavily regulate. This is a direct quote. He wants to heavily regulate the current UK vaping industry. He believes the current TRPR does not go far enough in the regulation that he thinks should be imposed on, and I quote, the dangers of vaping. The deputy leader of the Labour Party is quoted as saying, vaping is as bad as smoking. Look it up in Google. She said that, or he said that. Was that he or was it she? I don't think he or she's the deputy leader now, because I think this happened about 4 years ago. But they might still be the deputy leader. Multitudes of Labour backbenchers are of the opinion that this is as bad as smoking. This is not the Labour that myself and a lot of old socialists like me out there remember. The Labour that we remembered died with Tony Blair. When Tony Blair took over and christened it New Labour, the old Labour that we remembered was gone. It's gone. What we're looking at right now with the current Labour Party in the UK is basically Tory light. They're a very, very, very light blue. Very light blue. But they're still trying to claim that they're basically a centre-left party, but they're not. They're a new centre-left party. They're all for the political correctness. They are all for looking at something they don't like vaping. Looking at something they don't understand, like vaping, and saying, oh, that's bad, ban it. It happened in Australia. It happened in Canada. It started to happen in California, then spread to New York, then spread to New Jersey, then spread through the Midwest. It started to happen in certain countries that are left-leaning in Central Europe. It started to happen in Norway. It's starting to happen in Sweden. We were protected. This is why we've got it. This is why we've had it so good in the UK. We were protected by the Conservative Party. Now, the current disposable problem that's wrecking the UK industry forced the UK government to step in because local councils were seeing hundreds of disposables littering high streets. The UK government were forced to step in by the left-leaning people at the backbenches of the Conservative current party. But the problem is, you have got a Labour Party who will probably win the next general election at the end of this year, who has a health minister who says he wants to heavily regulate the entire vaping industry, who has backbenchers, more than a dozen of them, who want to ban e-liquid flavours, who has a shadow front bench, over half of them who are in agreement with the current Shadow Health Secretary about wanting stricter regulations, more regulations on top of those regulations to do with this. When, and it's not a case of if, there is no fucking hope in hell of the Tories winning at the end of this year, not after the fuck-ups they've done. When the Labour Party get in at the end of 2024, the first thing they will go after is this. They won't outright ban it, but they'll start to go after the flavours first. I'll guarantee you they will go after the flavours first. What Legion says is completely and utterly correct. Completely correct. However, and there is a big however, unlike Australia, unlike the United States, unlike Canada, who stepped in, passed legislation that wrecked the industry, their industries were not set up as firm as the UK industry is set up now. Because think about it, all you folks in the US and folks in Australia, this country's had 10 years clear with no interaction from government, with no clamp-ins from the Ministry of Health, with no clamp downs from trading standards unless the shop's being really fucking stupid. We have had a clear run over the past decade to set up an extremely robust vaping industry here in the UK. We are probably the only country that has got, on average, again this is on average, more than one vape shop per high street, more than one on average per high street for towns and cities over 20,000 population. There is literally thousands of vape shops, some people even say tens of thousands of vape shops, up and down this country from John O'Groats to Land's End, including Northern Ireland. We have got two massive trading industry groups. Well, one massive and a smaller one. You've got UKVIA, John Dunn, and you've got the IBVTA. You have got a massive advocacy group called the New Nicotine Alliance, which has been lobbying the government along with UKVIA and the IBVTA for the better part of half a decade. And they're not just lobbying the current Conservative Party, they're lobbying what will probably be the future government of the Labour MPs as well. Pardon me, John Dunn himself, the leader of UKVIA, said he actually had a word with a lot of Labour frontbenchers and actually made them shift away from anti-vaping to a much more neutral stance once he showed them The hard black and white evidence from the Royal College of Physicians. If the Labour Party go down the road of the Labour Party of the Australian government and what the Labour Party are now doing, they're in for a fight in the UK. They're in for a massive fight in the UK. But what Legion said can happen. Easily. Very easily. In the UK. Very easily. All we can do is wish our Australian friends and Australian reviewers, like Legion for instance, all the best of luck in whatever future endeavours they decide to do. If you are watching this in Australia, I would pay very close attention to what Legion and Bogan said. Stock up. Stock up on your coils. If you're using a stock coil sub-ohm tank system, try and switch to rebuildables, because it will be far easier for you to get your hands on Canthal wire than to get illegally banned imported coils, because they're going to be banned. So you're going to have to switch to rebuildables. You're going to have to do it. I would get your rebuildables in now, along with spools of Canthal wire. Cotton, you'll be fine with that. Get Muji pads, Muji cotton pads off of Amazon, you'll be fine with that. Learn how to DIY. Season 3 of E-Cigarette 101 on this channel shows you how to mix up very simple 2 or 3 flavour liquids. Stock up on your nicotine if you're going to go down that road, because come March 1st, it's over. It's literally over. It is shocking how fast Australia done a 180. Shocking how fast. Yes, some of it is to do with money. But a lot of it is to do with the sudden jerk reaction to the far left air of what the government in Australia used to be. And it's always the left that wants to ban. New left, not us old socialists. It's always the new left that wants to ban things they don't understand. Fucking scary. Bogan has already announced that he's moving here to the UK. And I personally think that is a very big risk, because, as I've just said, there is no guarantee that this vaping industry will still be the same vaping industry we recognise come midway through 2026. When? It's not a case of if, it's when the Labour Party gain power at the end of 2024. You will start to see the first signs of what Labour will do to the vaping industry midway through 2025, and it will start to take effect at the beginning of 2026. If Labour get in power, we have got round about a clear year. If they go down the wrong road, we have got a clear year to organise and demonstrate. Because if we sit back and do nothing, like what happened for vast bulks of the United States, we're going to end up in the same spot that Australia's in right now. And that's fucking guaranteed. We'll end up in the exact same spot. The one thing that any left-leaning government has got going for it that we can take advantage of is if there is large demonstrations, and I mean large demonstrations, 5,000, 10,000 people on the march, left-leaning governments are more than likely to collapse or give in and do a U-turn compared to a right-leaning government. Right-leaning governments tend to wait to see if the demonstrations will fizzle out after a week or so. Left-leaning governments panic. They panic. So we've got that to our advantage, I suppose. Anyway. Legion, if you're watching this, along with any other Australian vapors out there, good luck, Legion, whatever you decide to do in the future. And any Australian vapors watching this, do what Legion suggests. Stock up on as much as you possibly can. As much as you possibly can. Bogan, who's moving here to the UK, you're taking a big risk, dude. You're taking a fucking massive risk. Because there's no guarantee that this industry is safe when Labour gets in. And I'm saying this as someone who's on the left. I'm not new left, I'm old socialist left, but I'm saying this as someone who sits on the left. There's no guarantee that this industry is safe if Labour gets in. You've seen what happened in Australia. You've seen what happened in Canada. You've seen what happened in left-leaning democratic ran states. We're going to have a Labour government next year, dude. Left-leaning. You're taking a big risk. You're taking a big risk, Bogan. A big risk. Anyway. That's it from me, folks. Right now, UKVIA, John Dunn, is basically wading knee-deep through the Houses of Parliament lobby. Him and his trade organisation group have got their ear to the ground. I would keep an eye out on the UKVIA page. If it looks as if something bad is happening with vaping to do with the Labour Party, they'll be the first ones to announce it, because they've got their ear to the ground, more so than I've got these days, but they'll be the first to announce it. Keep an eye on what UKVIA is saying. If I hear anything on the run-up, because the question of vaping is bound to come up to Labour as we get closer and closer to the general election. I'll be keeping a very close eye on what the Labour politicians are saying about what they will do to the vaping industry. But right now, Labour is decidedly anti-vaping. There's no ifs, there's no buts, there's no grey haze fog. They are anti-vaping. That's a fact. Compared to the Conservative Party, they are anti-vaping, and they've been so for the past half decade. Anyway, that is it for me, folks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later on.